Chief Financial Correspondent Ann Thompson on the trial and whether anything has changed since Enron.
Together, Ken Lay and Jeff Skilling led Enron, once the nation's 7th largest company.
I'm fine.
And today, together, they went on trial for fraud and conspiracy in its collapse.
In the same way that I think Watergate was a watershed event for the political arena, Enron was that for the business arena.
But 4 years later, where are we in the fight against corporate crime?
Landmark legislation like
Stephen
that.
Cutler led the Security and Exchange Commission's Enforcement Division until last April, winning some $6 billion in penalties and the return of ill-gotten gains, as federal prosecutors racked up a string of high-profile convictions. WorldCom CEO Bernie Ebbers, Adelphia founder John Regas, and Martha Stewart. But Cutler, now in private practice, says the fight isn't over.
The vigilance that's required is akin to the sunscreen that you need to put on when you go to the beach, or the dental floss that you've got to use every day. You can't do it just once.
Who knows what percent?
At the University of Chicago Business School, James Schrager uses Enron to scare his leadership students straight.
I wanted to live with Jeff Skilling's pain that he has right now.
But from some, he gets a surprising reaction.
They will argue back with me. They will say, well, you know, Skilling's got $20 million and he's going to beat the rap and he's going to live happily ever after.
Charles Gasparino wrote about the scandals and thinks most corporations have learned some lessons enforced by new financial reporting laws.
What everybody's doing right now is dotting their I's, crossing their T's, and making sure what they disclose is accurate.
And watching closely what happens here to the two men involved in the scandal that cost shareholders $63 billion. Ann Thompson, NBC News, Houston.
Former Enron Vice President Sharon Watkins is perhaps the closest thing to a public hero to emerge from this scandal. In 2001, she blew the whistle on what she believed were accounting scandals at the company, and she testified for the prosecution at the trial. Sharon, good to see you again. Good morning.
Good morning.
What was your response to the verdicts?
Well, it feels a long time in coming. Enron collapsed into bankruptcy in late 2001, and it's here the spring of 2006. But
You think they're fair, though, the verdicts?
yes, I do. I think leaders, they should bear not only the privilege of office, but also the responsibility.
Let me remind people why you're sitting here. You joined the company at 34 years old, enjoyed 8 years there, loved your job, and then all of a sudden you started to see these accounting practices that you described to me as aggressive. You weren't sure they were illegal. You wrote a memo to Ken Lay, you went to see him in person, and you said, look, these could lead to the collapse of Enron. And his response was what?
Well, he seemed to take me seriously, but he ended up using the same outside lawyers that had helped form these fraudulent structures to investigate them.
And actually tried to get you fired at the same time. So Ken Lay, when he told the world that he knew nothing about these scandals, he was as surprised as anyone else to find out about them. And when he urged people to buy Enron stock at the very moment that company was on the verge of going over the cliff, you have no doubt that he was lying at that time.
Yes, he knew otherwise, and he even said we have the utmost faith in our CFO, Andy Fastow, when my memos were really about Andy's activities.
We're going to talk about Andy Fastow in a second. In an interview you did with me in 2003, here is how you described the former CEO Jeff Skilling, who was also convicted yesterday. You can't underestimate the charismatic power of Jeff Skilling. And I liken him to David Koresh in Waco, you know, where we all just believed that he'd find a way to pull a rabbit out of the hat. Were you at all surprised, Sharon, that that charisma didn't serve him better and he didn't find a way to beat these charges?
Well, there were just so many, and he did perform much better than Ken Lay in court, but he's not really in a power position anymore. He had lost some of that magnetism that he had held.
Some of that luster. Mm-hmm. You testified before Congress with Skilling sitting next to you. You testified in this federal trial. What was that like?
The federal trial was high pressure because I had two highly paid defense teams, you know, trying to make me look silly. So it was more pressure even than Congress. But in the end, truth prevailed. Sentencing,
okay? These guys face decades in prison. I mean, if you add it all up, they could spend the rest of their lives in prison.
Yes.
Do you think that's what they deserve?
It's hard to say, but I do think longer prison terms are a deterrent. If it's just 2 to 3 years, that didn't seem to stop, high dollar, white collar crime.
What about Andy Fasto? I mean, a lot of people think this guy was as crooked, if not more crooked, than Ken Lay and Jeff Skilling, yet he flipped on them, worked with the prosecution. He'll face decades less in prison as a result of that. Do you think it's fair?
Well, he's going to still go for 10 years, and I think it's the way the system worked. He confessed to wrongdoing, he was remorseful, and with confession there's sort of forgiveness and a little bit of leniency in the punishment. But when you stand fast that you did nothing wrong, you seem to get the worst punishment.
You feel as if your actions now were all for something?
Well, maybe a bit. I wish it wouldn't have been so little so late. I wish the company were still alive, but at least justice seems to have been done.
Sharon Watkins, thanks for coming in this morning. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.